Hello and welcome to this Tony Surridge video guide on the topic of F8 Audit and Assurance for the ACCA examining body. The Tony Surridge team have a wide range of ACCA study ebooks and would like to thank a number of professionals and students who have helped us over the years to shape our ideas and give depth to the knowledge which we're able to pass on. We're extremely grateful to them all. Naturally, for further information on the F8 exam, any of the topics contained within, and even some other ACCA subjects which we cover, please do take a look at our website www.tonysurridge.co.uk. Okay, so having a look now at F8, of course the story, or rather the study of audit, is not popular with many students who often look upon it as another one of those dead or discursive subjects which requires a lot of reading, regurgitation of facts, and then in the exam having to respond to situations which most of us have never been in and perhaps never will be. In fact, the truth is anything but. In the last few years, the auditing environment has changed dramatically. Corporate scandals in the US and Europe led to serious concern about the quality of financial reporting and corporate behaviour. Inadequate audits, poor corporate governance, lax standards and insufficient regulatory oversights were, to varying degrees, blamed for the problem. In particular, the regulation of accounting firms and their auditing practices came under intense scrutiny throughout the world. The scope, applied standards, and even the thinking behind the audit has changed, and these changes need to be reflected in what ACCA students learn. Students need a clear understanding of what is important in audits today. They need to learn the principles and be aware of what audit tools they will be using, and above all, they need to appreciate the extreme importance of auditing as part of their professional tool bag. Interestingly enough, we often find students are very reluctant to commence their studies of audit in light of the view that it might be boring or quite hard in terms of the reading levels. But by the end of the program, they are so enthusiastic about what they've found and what's actually involved that they decide this ought to be their chosen career, their chosen area of specialism within their accounting profession. Let's see how you guys fare. Okay, so moving on now. Before starting your studies of auditing, it's very useful to get an overview of the stages involved. So drilling down into more detail makes sense. It's like producing a coloured picture. First you outline in pencil to give shape, and then the colours can be added for life and detail. To help provide an overview, let's go through the stages of a simulated audit engagement. The details, shall we say, as follows. Imagine a made-up case study. Okay, so you're a partner at, say, Green and Associates, a made-up company name, a medium to large accounting firm, and then one morning, a letter is received from a potential client, let's call them Goody Sweet Manufacturing, or GSM for short, a local unlisted UK company which requests your company to submit a proposal for its current audit. Now, you understand from the letter that GSM is of a size considered small by UK legislation, but its principal shareholder, say, who is not employed by the company, by using a legal entitlement, has insisted on an audit by an independent auditor. This will be GSM's first independent audit. Now, the senior partner in your firm has assigned you to be GSM's engagement partner. Now, you know there are 7 main stages involved, and okay, we're going to quickly just go through those now. The first stage, background knowledge. Having the background knowledge of auditing, its principles and practice, is of course essential and assumed by the examiner. The first thing to do is then to secure the audit, if you want it. Moving on. A central requirement is the planning of the audit. You'll find that this is often heavily examined in your ACCA FA exams. Next, the first hands-on testing part of the audit involves control testing. This interim audit can commence before the closing date of the financial statements. And then moving on, the interim audit will determine the nature and scope of the final audit. Most of the final audit takes place after the closing date of the financial statements. Next is the all-important review stage. A lot of peer quality testing goes on at this stage. Also, auditors must worry about subsequent events, going concern problems, and so on. And then finally, the audit prepares and issues reports. There are 6 main types of audit report, and also the auditor has a duty to report to the GSM's management by means of a management letter. The following overview screens, which we'll go through in a minute, goes through these processes, stages and documents involved in such an audit engagement in just a little bit more detail. And this overview will give you a good idea of what is involved in the ACCA Paper F8 syllabus. Now, in general terms, the examiner will expect you to know things such as what is an audit, who are the audit teams, such as their titles, responsibilities, etc., the distinction between internal and external auditing, the meaning of true and fair view, and the importance of materiality. Let's have a look at the objectives of the audit. The objective of the audit is for the auditor to form an opinion as to the true and fair view of the historic financial statements and to report this to the users, thus giving them professional assurance. The auditor will also report deficiencies in the financial system to the client's management. Legal requirements. Now, the auditor needs to comply with statutory requirements which cover appointment, removal and resignation of auditors, the rights and duties of auditors, and the reports of listed companies. Unfortunately, that is not all. The auditor is also regulated by international standards on auditing, otherwise known as ISAs. The Paper F8 syllabus includes awareness of 31 ISAs, but, however, good news, detailed knowledge is not required. It is always useful to quote the main ISAs in support of points that you raise in your F8 exam, such as, to give a couple of examples, ISA 210, agreeing the terms of audit engagements, ISA 300, planning and audit of financial statements, ISA 500, audit evidence, and another one, ISA 700, forming an opinion and reporting on financial statements, etc. Now, the examiner will expect candidates to know the ACCA's rules of professional conduct. In the past, this has proved to be a very fertile area for final exams. And of course, any auditor would need to know the procedures and rules of their own accounting firm. That's the last thing there to take into consideration. And of course, one little final note there, don't forget you are a professional accountant accredited by ACCA, so therefore this shouldn't be a problem for you. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the first step on your journey through the audit. In this phase of the audit, you'll have 2 objectives. To examine GSM, the client, who the international auditing standards actually refer to as the entity, to determine whether there is any reason to reject the engagement. In other words, do we want to audit the engagement, or do we want the audit engagement, I should say, rather. On the basis that we do want to obtain the audit engagement, we then need to convince GSM or your client to employ our firm. Okay, so as outlined here, the first step involves 6 procedures. The auditor must consider his or her ability to meet the required deadline date, understanding of the business and technical knowledge required of the client's industry, as well as the legislation and regulations relevant to the client's industry. The need for specific competencies and issues relating to objectivity and independence will also be of further consideration here. At this stage, the auditor would also consider the nature of the client and its management, its business position and ethics, and the risk it presents. Pending litigation, overdue taxation, and previously modified audit reports, etc., will all be part of this appraisal exercise. The auditor will also need to determine whether his or her firm needs to employ the work of other specialists or experts as part of the audit. For example, if the audit involves testing valuation placed on art, then the auditor would probably need to call on the services of an expert from the art world. The need for other specialists or experts will be an important consideration for planning the costs of the audit and subsequently the fee that you will be charging to the client, as well as understanding the complexity of the audit testing itself. Also, occasionally, there may be a need to communicate with the predecessor auditor who may be willing to pass on important facts concerning the client. Obviously, not the case if this is the first audit. This can raise complicated and behavioural issues which a candidate in the exam needs to be aware of. Selecting the staff. Okay, depending on the policy of the particular accounting firm, an audit team can include the engagement the engagement partner, the quality assurance partner, the audit manager, audit seniors, and assistant auditors. They all have individual roles to play. Now, in terms of a client proposal normally includes an executive summary, client expectations, details of the audit team, the proposed audit approach, after service monitoring and fees, etc. The written proposal becomes part of the audit documentation. And if you take a look at ISA 210, the terms of audit engagement, that provides a very useful guide on the type of engagement letter delivered to the client, which should be dated and signed as acceptance by the client. This letter then also becomes part of the audit documentation. Okay, so going back now to the case study there. Let's say one day soon after submitting your proposal, a telephone call coming from the GSM's finance director confirms that your accounting firm has been awarded the engagement contract. You have sent your new client the engagement letter and all is satisfactory, so now you need to plan the audit, and that is not necessarily an easy task. Your audit will be made of two main parts. Tests of controls. It is important first to test the entity's internal controls, also known as the interim audit. Control testing can be conducted before the closing date of the financial statements. The nature, scope and timing of the final audit procedures take their most significant impetus from a thorough understanding of design and operating effectiveness of the entity's internal control. If the control environment is shown to be strong, then the scope and extent of the final audit can be reduced. And the final audit. In the main, the final audit involves detailed substantive audit procedures and testing. As just suggested, the scope of substantive testing is influenced by the effectiveness of the client's internal controls. Okay, the auditor would want to assess as much information as possible about the entity and its business environment when planning its audit. An important part of planning is to assess the risks of material misstatements. Knowledge of the entity's business risks and the effectiveness of its internal control would be essential for this task. The auditor would use such knowledge to set a level of acceptable audit risk, that is, the risk that the auditor might form an incorrect opinion. And the lower the acceptable risk set, the bigger is the need for audit procedures and testing to be planned. Sorry there, yeah, that's the audits of material misstatements there. Auditors are not required to certify that financial statements are 100% accurate. That would be somewhat of an impossible task. But rather, they report that accounts represent a true and fair view, which, although not providing 100% assurance, does give the user sufficient professional assurance about the accuracy of their financial statements. True and fair, therefore, leaves the auditor to make judgment about what level of error is or is not material to the true and fair view. The lower the level of materiality set, obviously the greater the scope of audit required. Consider for a moment the amount of homework that you would have to put in if you only allowed yourself a 2% chance of exam failure. And looking at the planning strategy, then an audit strategy statement is a very wide, dealing with the whole audit and covering matters such as audit completion date, audit staff to be employed, quality assurance requirements, etc. And then, on the other hand, though, an audit plan is prepared for each facet of the audit procedures and testing. For example, a detailed audit plan would be prepared for testing the entity's sales receipt systems, another for verifying inventory valuation, and yet another for confirming bank balances, and so on and so on. Okay, so let's get down to work. The audit team have been assigned. Your plan is established. After discussion with the members of the audit team, now the audit work begins. Your aims in this, the main part of the audit, are to test for evidence of the strengths or weaknesses of your client GSM's internal control structure, the interim audit, and then test for evidence of the fairness of the financial statements, which obviously forms the final audit. The controls testing phase of your audit will involve the 6 main procedures detailed on the screen now. Controls testing forms the central part of modern auditing and gives rise to the term risk-based auditing. If controls are weak, there is greater risk of material misstatements in the financial statements, and thus more need for other audit procedures to be undertaken. In essence, auditors are concerned to ensure that 1. Controls are in place, 2. That these controls are complied with, and 3. That they are effective. Controls testing provides other fertile ground here for the exam questions, and this time of a practical nature, so please bear this in mind for your ACCA F8 preparation. The 6 main procedures detailed on the screen need to be examined at the depth required for you to achieve the right level of exam confidence. Right, moving on. Okay, so the final audit, that was the interim audit. Now, for the final audit, entails testing entity management's assertions of transactions, balances, disclosures, and presentation, gathering sufficient and appropriate audit evidence by audit procedures and testing, confirming balances, sampling where appropriate, reviewing management estimates, testing opening balances in the case of a first-time audit, and carrying out substantive and detailed tests in each planned area. Time to wrap up the audit now, and the final review stage just prior to the preparation and signing of the audit report is the important concluding step in the audit process. It is the auditor's opportunity to make an overall examination of the financial statements before coming to a decision on the appropriate form of the audit report. Review is usually undertaken by senior audit staff, including the audit engagement partner, who will ultimately sign the end report. The elements included in the overall review stage include, looking at the five procedures here, the review of the entity's corporate governance policies and systems, review of subsequent events, review of the going concern concept, wrapping up procedures such as overall analytical review and management representations, and then finally consideration of matters of attention of partners, MAP for short. Here at the final stage, then, the need to produce the reports. The objectives of the auditor here are: 1. To form an opinion on the financial statements based on an evaluation of the conclusions drawn from the audit evidence obtained, and 2. To express clearly that opinion through a written report that also describes the basis for that opinion. The auditor would form an opinion on whether the financial statements are prepared in all material respects in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework. In order to form that opinion, the auditor would conclude as to whether he or she has obtained reasonable assurances about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatements, whether not due to fraud or perhaps error. That conclusion would take into account the auditor's conclusions whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained, and the auditor's conclusion whether uncorrected misstatements are material individually or in aggregate, and finally the evaluations required. And finally, the last step there is the dated and signed audit report is delivered to the entity's management, known as the management letter. So to summarise then the things that we've covered off in this quick overview of the FA audit topic, starting with number one, the background knowledge into the client, the obtaining of the audit itself, planning the audit and gathering necessary teams and specialist resources as required, conducting the interim audit itself, conducting the final audit, secondly, the review, and lastly, the reporting back to the client. Okay, well look, that's it. That there is our quick overview of the ACCA F8 topic, and a little bit of a brief insight as to what you may expect, and a couple of snippets of what you can, what you should be revising for your ACCA F8 exams. Please do have a look at our website www.tonysarge.co.uk and have a look in our ACCA study section. We've actually got 2 ebooks at the moment for the F8 topic. Our F8 Q&A, as you can see there, we have a full range of multiple choice questions and answers, diagnostic Q&As again, exam status Q&As, which is a little bit more in depth, and ISA based short Q&As, and a whole load more. The other type of ebook that we provide for the ACCA FA exam are our revision mnemonics and charts. This is a little bit more visual, helps with memory aids and memory mnemonics, as well as specimen examples of audit working papers. There's a lot of pictorial information there in this ebook, and a full glossary of goodness knows how many FA audit and assurance terms. We hope that you enjoyed our quick presentation overview, and hopefully we'll see you again soon for the next one. Thank you. All the best.